Hey guys, tonight we journey into the sun-warmed stillness of the American Southwest, where time moves like wind through mesquite branches. The desert greets us with a hush, like a blanket gently being drawn over the earth at the close of day. You can almost feel it in the air, the heat of the afternoon now slipping away, replaced by a softness, a subtle calm. The sky is a canvas of dusty rose and fading gold. There's something timeless about this moment, as if the land itself exhales and invites us in. The world quiets, shadows stretch long and slow, and the rhythm of life eases into something slower, something more tender. Let's step together into this vast and quiet story, where sandstone whispers and the wind carries memory. The train had arrived sometime in the late afternoon, though no one seemed in a rush to mark the time. It was the kind of train that still ran on slow tracks and slower intentions. A single worn engine pulling a pair of faded cars across the wide, open plain. As I stepped down from the last creaking stair onto the warm platform of a near-forgotten station, the first thing I noticed was the scent. Dry sagebrush and old timber. A breath of heat clinging to adobe walls. The soft, spicy fragrance of earth that had baked under sun for centuries. Around me, the small station was empty, but not abandoned. A bench rested under the shade of a crooked wooden beam. Nearby, a painted sign, hand-lettered and sun-bleached, leaned slightly toward the tracks. There were no cars, no luggage, no announcements, only the quiet creak of wind passing through the wooden slats and a gentle rustling from a far-off mesquite tree. The silence here wasn't empty. It was full of the land, of history, of the feeling that something ancient lived just beneath the surface of things. Walking away from the platform, my boots stirred up a thin cloud of dust with each soft step. The road ahead was more suggestion than pavement, an unmarked path bordered by low adobe walls and scattered wildflowers surviving valiantly in the dry heat. There was no hurry. The desert does not rush. It waits. It welcomes. I followed the road as it gently curved into the heart of the town, if it could be called that. Just a handful of buildings, all nestled into the landscape, as if grown there naturally, not built. A cluster of homes made from red clay and straw sat quietly behind small wooden gates. Their curved edges and flat roofs mirrored the distant mesas on the horizon. Above one doorway, a chime of rusted tin whispered in the breeze. A cat, golden-eyed and slow-moving, watched me pass from atop a sun-warmed step. In a window, someone had set a vase of dried yucca blossoms. Every detail seemed deliberate, yet unspoken. Nothing shouted here. Everything existed in a kind of soft focus. Further down, a narrow alley branched off between two buildings, one of which might once have been a general store. Its windows were faded but intact, and behind the glass sat a row of dusty mason jars, the contents long forgotten, but still proudly displayed. The door was closed, though the sign hanging on it open, if your patience swayed gently in the breeze. I wandered further, led not by destination, but by curiosity. The sun dipped lower, casting a golden-orange sheen across the adobe walls, turning every surface into a canvas of light and shadow. High above, a hawk drifted soundlessly on a thermal, its wings barely shifting. The world below moved slower with each passing minute. Even my breath seemed to match the pace of the place. Unhurried, a little deeper, a little softer. Beyond the small rise, the road opened into what might once have been a central plaza. A circle of earth cleared between low buildings, with benches made of stone and a sun-faded mural on the wall behind them. It depicted a great circle of hands, some painted in the style of ancient petroglyphs, others more recent. Around the mural, small clay pots with succulents sat neatly in a row, tended with care and quiet pride. There was no sound but the desert. Not silence, truly, but the kind of sound that feels like silence. The gentle, distant hum of insects. A breeze passing through brittle leaves. The low, near inaudible shift of sand against stone. It was a silence that comforted, that invited the mind to rest, to breathe in time with the land. I sat for a moment on a bench warmed by the day's heat. The wood beneath me smooth, the air around me still. There was a softness in everything edges, worn down by years of sun and wind. Colors faded into warm pastels, movement replaced with stillness. Even the birds seemed to fly slower here. In the distance, I could see the edges of the desert rising flat mesas under the weight of the sky, their shadows deepening. Each one seemed to hold a secret, something left unsaid but deeply understood. The land didn't offer its stories quickly, but if you listened, truly listened, they would find you. From this place, at the edge of the evening, I began to sense a rhythm that had nothing to do with clocks or calendars. It pulsed from the earth itself, slow and steady, like a heartbeat half remembered. A kind of music, but without sound. A lullaby written by sun and stone. As the sky shifted from coral to lavender, the coolness began to settle in. Not cold, just a tender relief from the day's warmth. Somewhere behind me, a lantern was lit. Its flicker reflected off a window pane, casting a single golden dot into the growing dusk. Light in the desert is never wasted. It is cherished, protected. I watched the stars begin to form, faint at first, then clearer with each blink. The first was always the same, a pale glint directly above the tallest mesa. Then another, and another, until the sky was freckled with quiet fires. It felt almost like returning home to something you never knew you missed. And so the story begins, not with action or urgency, but with a long, slow exhale into a land shaped by time, by silence, and by the soft insistence of life that finds its way even in the driest places. Tonight, we rest here, together, in a town where the air carries memory and the stars hang low and kind. There is much still to explore, but for now, let's sit in this golden hush and let the desert welcome us. The morning came slowly in the desert, as though even the sun understood the importance of moving gently through this place. A soft light began to spill across the hills, painting the ridges with delicate strokes of peach and amber. It touched the tops of mesquite trees, slipped down the adobe walls, and glimmered faintly on the window panes of quiet homes. The air still carried the cool memory of night, crisp but never biting, like the final sigh of a good dream. In this silence, the town seemed to stretch, to blink open its eyes, but never fully rise. It was the kind of place where buildings looked as though they had grown from the earth itself. Walls of red and rust-colored sandstone stood quietly beneath the sky, each surface weathered with dignity. Small flecks of quartz caught the light and shimmered like tiny stars embedded in clay. These were not structures designed for grandeur or spectacle, but for harmony with the land, with time, with the soft movement of wind and sun. I walked slowly, letting the morning surround me. Every footstep stirred the thin, golden dust that blanketed the road. It rose gently, then settled again, like it had done for centuries. There were no cars here, no signs of urgency or rush. Just quiet porches, sleeping wind chimes, and the occasional low call of a mourning dove. The streets were more like pathways, soft and yielding, shaped over time by footsteps rather than wheels. They curved and wandered as they pleased, bordered by stones, flowering sage, and the occasional half-sunken bench. The town followed no strict grid or map. It flowed the way water once did, meandering in rhythm with the land. There were homes here that leaned slightly with age, corners rounded by decades of wind, their doors worn smooth by generations of quiet arrivals. Many had thick walls and small, deep-set windows, made to keep the heat out in summer and warmth in during winter. Some had bundles of dried herbs hanging from their lintels, lavender, sage, and desert marigold, their colors faded, but their scents still lingering sweetly in the morning air. One home, nestled at the edge of the central square, had a long wooden beam across its front, and beneath it, a series of clay bells hung on string. They moved gently, even in stillness, as if breathing with the house itself. When the wind did come, they offered no clatter, just a soft, irregular song that seemed to speak in whispers rather than tones. I wandered past what might once have been a schoolhouse. Its sign had long since faded, but the shape of the building, a simple rectangle with tall windows, spoke of children's laughter, chalky hands, and dusty lessons written in looping script. Now it stood quiet, repurposed perhaps, or simply remembered. Vines curled up one corner of the building, their slow, determined growth a quiet testament to time's gentle reach. Further on, there was a chapel, small, with a bell tower just tall enough to be noticed from the street. Its white plaster had cracked in places, revealing the warm red stone beneath. The door was ajar, not out of neglect, but invitation. No sign marked it open or closed. It simply was. Just inside, a wooden bench rested beneath a window stained amber and blue, casting soft patterns across the floor where sun filtered in. It smelled of old cedar and candle wax, with a hint of dust clean and comforting. The town, in every small detail, spoke quietly of resilience. Not a harsh or desperate kind, but one shaped by understanding and grace. It did not resist the desert, it moved with it. The walls were low and thick, crafted from sun-baked clay and stone, designed not to fight the heat, but to hold it gently, releasing warmth slowly after sundown. Shaded courtyards opened to the sky, but remained cool, their stone floors smooth underfoot. Water was not abundant here, yet when it came, it was gathered with care kept, shared, honored. Even the smallest plants that grew tight-leaved, low to the ground, seemed to belong completely, each one chosen not for appearance, but for wisdom. At the far edge of the plaza, I came upon an old fountain. No longer flowing, it remained quietly beautiful. Its basin, shallow and worn smooth by time, was lined with pale desert pebbles. A few birds gathered there, resting along its edge, their feathers ruffled by a passing breeze. Someone, perhaps from one of the nearby homes, had placed a small ceramic bowl on the ledge. It held clear rainwater, glinting in the light, a small gesture, a simple one, but it held meaning, a kindness offered without ceremony. In a place like this, nothing was wasted, not water, not warmth, not silence. As the sun rose higher, the color of the walls changed. The sandstone absorbed the growing light and glowed softly in hues of amber and ochre. It was a warm color, not bright or sharp, but mellow and full of depth like honey, like evening light held in stone. Where the light could not reach, the shadows fell gently. Their edges were blurred, soft and quiet, like old silk tucked into the corners of a room. There was a calm rhythm to the town, one shaped by age and patience. It didn't draw attention to itself. It simply stood, nestled into the land, steady and slow. The beauty here wasn't tea and boldness. It was in the way each line curved to meet the sun, in the faded colors of woven blankets left to rest on porch rails, in the care with which stones were arranged around a flowering hello. Even without seeing a soul, I felt the presence of others, those who had lived here, who still did. Their touch was in every detail. Standing in the heart of the plaza, I watched a wind vane shaped like a sunburst turn lazily in the breeze. The movement was slow, almost imperceptible, and yet somehow it held my attention for minutes. Time did not stop it, simply lost its edge. And in that soft stillness, I felt something important settle within me. Not a thought, exactly. Not a memory. Just a sense of being part of something lasting. The sandstone around me held stories not told in words, but in warmth, texture, and time. There was no need to move forward. Not yet. This moment was whole, and in its quiet, I could rest. The sun had risen fully now, but it brought no urgency with it. Instead, It warmed the adobe walls and rooftops like a quiet reassurance, a daily ritual as predictable as breath. I stepped away from the plaza, letting my path be chosen not by direction, but by the soft tug of curiosity. The streets here, if they could be called, that wove gently through the town, unpaved and welcoming, their sandy surfaces textured by countless footsteps over generations. Each path was an invitation, not a demand, not a summons, just a quiet suggestion to wander. My footsteps left no sharp imprint, only a hush of motion in the dust. Tiny flecks of mica shimmered in the soil, catching the morning light like scattered stardust. They didn't flash or glint, but rather glowed faintly, as though the earth itself held small memories of fire. Along the edge of the path, narrow garden plots appeared in the quietest ways, patches of low desert marigolds, tufts of silver-leafed sage, and prickly pears resting heavy with round fruit. There were no fences here, only low borders of rounded stones, laid by hand and placed with a kind of care that spoke of time, not haste. I passed a wall wrapped in blooming trumpet vines, their orange blossoms curling like tiny horns, calling not to battle, but to peace. The homes stood back from the paths, respectful of space. Their shapes were simple curved corners, soft edges, and windows so modest they seemed like glances, not gazes. Some windows were open just slightly, propped with wooden sticks to let in the breeze. Curtains inside, light and worn, stirred gently with each breath of wind. From time to time, I caught the faintest trace of someone's morning coffee warming, bread being toasted, a broom sweeping across an old clay floor. I paused at a corner where two narrow paths crossed like faded threads in a woven cloth. A tree grew there, tall and patient, a mesquite, with fine leaves that trembled in the smallest stir of air. Beneath it, a stone bench waited in a patch of shade that hadn't yet burned away. I sat for a moment, not because I was tired, but because it seemed like the right thing to do. In this town, movement was never rushed. Even rest felt like part of the journey. Across from the bench, a wall had been painted long ago. The mural was worn and chipped in places, but its story still lived in color. A desert scene stretched across the plaster, a circle of figures dancing around a fire, their forms simple, almost symbolic, like those ancient shapes carved into canyon walls. Around them, stars hovered, painted in deep blues and ochres, their points softened by time. Someone had signed it in a corner, the name faded to little more than a memory. But the image endured, as though the wall remembered what the world had forgotten. As I rose and began walking again, the dust clung gently to my boots, as if reluctant to let me go. The path led through another small neighborhood, where porches opened to the morning, and pots of flowering succulents lined the steps. I passed a stack of firewood, neatly arranged beside a home with a woven mat hanging on its door. The mat bore a simple design, a sun above a spiral. I didn't know the meaning, but I didn't need to. Some things you feel without needing to name. Further on, a breeze drifted past, carrying with it the scent of warm stone and blooming creosote. It wrapped around me like a shawl, weightless but present, full of the day's promise. Wind chimes whispered from a far-off porch, each note barely audible, yet somehow perfectly placed. The rhythm of the town seemed to settle into my chest, matching the pace of my breath, the length of my stride. On one stretch of path, the sun fell in long golden bands through the crooked slats of a wooden fence. Shadows formed stripes across the road, soft and slanted, as if the morning light were being filtered through a page of music. A lizard, small and sand-colored, darted from one sunbeam to the next, pausing to blink at me before vanishing under a rock. Nothing here moved in haste, yet everything found its place. I turned a corner where a small open-air workshop stood. It was quiet now, but the scent of leather and clay lingered in the air. Tools hung neatly from nails on the back wall, their handles smooth with use. On a nearby shelf, Rows of half-finished items sat in patient stillness baskets, hand-stitched pouches, a small gourd bowl painted with zigzag lines. Nothing flashy, nothing hurried. Just honest things made slowly. The path narrowed further, becoming more like a trail now, brushed at its edges by wild grasses and dotted with scattered stones. I welcomed the shift, allowing my pace to slow even more, the rhythm of my steps now fully synced with the hush of the place. The only sound was the quiet crunch of gravel beneath my feet, the occasional rustle of something small in the underbrush, and the ever-present whisper of wind weaving its way between homes, hills, and time itself. As I walked, I began to realize that the town was not built for destination. It was built for wandering. Each bend led not to somewhere specific, but to a feeling. Each home, each garden, each gently sloping path offered a moment to pause, to notice, to breathe. It wasn't a place to pass through. It was a place to move within. Eventually, the trail opened back into a small clearing ringed with sun-baked stones and bordered by tall grasses, swaying in quiet conversation. At its center was another bench, this one carved from a single piece of driftwood, its shape worn smooth by time and touch. I sat again, letting my eyes follow the horizon where dusty pink hills met the morning sky. There was no sound but the wind, the breath of the earth itself. Here, amidst dusty paths and shifting light, I felt not like a visitor, but like someone returning, not to a specific memory, but to a way of being, a softer pace, a quieter mind. A world where footsteps didn't echo, but whispered, where every step was an offering, not a mark. The trail gently curved once more, this time leading me to a quieter corner of the town, where the homes nestled closer together as if for company. Their walls, the color of warm sand and cinnamon, rose low and rounded beneath the sky, shaped not by blueprints, but by hands. Adobe sun-dried earth and straw formed every curve and surface, and the buildings looked not so much constructed as grown from the land itself. Here, the clay was more than shelter. It was memory, still soft in the way it held each impression. The smallest undulation on a wall, the faint print of a mason's palm, a child's scratch turned smooth with years. These were not flaws, but stories, pressed into place over generations. The surface of each home bore gentle evidence of time. There were no sharp lines. Everything flowed. In the rising warmth of day, the adobe gave off a scent both earthy and clean, like soil after a light rain. And when the wind shifted, it carried the perfume of woven baskets left out to dry, their fibers cured by sun and wind. Around one doorway, a string of dried chili peppers hung in a long, crinkled garland. They rustled faintly as the breeze passed, a soft, papery whisper that reminded me of pages turning in an old book. I paused before one particular home. Its outer wall had been painted in gentle strokes of natural pigment, a series of concentric spirals, like coiled pottery or desert winds sketched into stone. Near the entrance, a mat of woven yucca fibers lay neatly underfoot. It bore a simple pattern, triangles that mirrored the surrounding mountains. These designs didn't shout. They didn't clamor for attention. They offered themselves slowly, like stories told at twilight. Further down the lane, I passed an open alcove where an old loom stood, quiet and dignified in its rest. Spools of dyed wool sat nearby muted reds, dusty blues, the pale yellow of desert blooms. The patterns woven here weren't decorative, they were meditations. Geometric forms stretched in deliberate harmony. Each thread pulled not only through cloth, but through thought. Someone had woven their mourning into this cloth, their silence, their steadiness. On a low table beside the loom, a basket of clay figures weighted small animals, hollow-bodied and painted with ochre and white. A rabbit, a crow, a horned toad. They looked up not at me, but beyond me, as if already dreaming. Behind them, shelves of pottery lined the wall. Bowls and jars, shaped by coil and hand, each one slightly different, but clearly related siblings in earth and fire. The door to the home was open, though the room beyond was dark. Just inside, I could see a wall lined with more baskets and hanging gourds. Everything was arranged with balance, not precision. Not a museum, but a memory still living. In a corner, a candle flickered, its light catching on the rim of a copper kettle. There was the faint scent of something herbal rosemary, perhaps, or wild mint. Not strong, just enough to notice. I didn't enter. I didn't need to. The space, even seen from outside, felt whole. It held warmth, not from flame, but from the way it had been lived in. You could feel the rhythm of daily tasks here, kneading, shaping, tending. There was no need to witness it in motion. The motion had already shaped the place, like wind over stone. The path turned again, and more adobe homes came into view, some built close to the hillside, blending almost completely with the slope. From a distance, they seemed like outcroppings of the earth natural, inevitable. A few had small porches with chairs made of wood and rope, their backs worn to a smooth polish. One held a woven blanket, neatly folded over the rail, its pattern echoing the horizon. Low lines, rising sun, scattered stars. Near another home, a low wall formed an oval enclosure around a kitchen garden. It wasn't a show of abundance, but a quiet act of tending. Rows of beans, squash, and herbs rested in raised mounds circled with river stones. The leaves fluttered slightly as I passed, their shapes casting gentle shadows across the soil. From one of the windows came a faint soundwood being stirred in a hearth, the hush of a spoon moving through a clay bowl. Further on, I came across a small mural painted low along a courtyard wall. It showed a figure curled in sleep, surrounded by hills and stars. Their body mirrored the curves of the land, and the hills mirrored the folds of a blanket. A gentle reminder, perhaps, that rest was not a pause from life, but part of it. That sleep, too, was a way of belonging. By now, the sun was leaning closer to midday, but the heat still held a gentleness. In the shaded spaces between homes, it barely touched the ground. Here, time moved in glides and sighs. The day didn't press forward, it unfurled. The clay walls held on to the coolness of morning, their breath slow and steady. I let my fingertips brush one as I passed, tracing a gentle arc. The texture was slightly rough, but soft in its way-like time woven into surface. I thought again of the baskets, the blankets, the painted walls, the spiral motifs passed hand to hand across centuries. These things weren't for decoration. They were language. Quiet words offered in thread and earth. Here, stories were not written, but lived folded into clay, tucked between woven reeds, etched into the soft curves of homes shaped by patience. There was no need to interpret them, only to sit with them, breathe with them, and allow their meaning to unfold in silence. I found another bench beneath a flowering tree pale blossoms scattered like slow-falling snow across the dusty ground. I sat once more, letting the warmth of the adobe nearby reflect back at me like a silent companion. And for a long moment, I did nothing. I simply rested in the company of clay and sun, where every wall held a story, and every stillness was part of the telling. The afternoon came slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the stillness that had settled over the desert town. The sun, now high above, cast a golden hush across the rooftops and the winding footpaths between homes. Heat shimmered gently over the stone and adobe walls, but beneath the right shade, there was quiet comfort to be found. It was the kind of warmth that encouraged stillness, rather than motion, and invited the body and mind into rest. At the edge of the village, beyond a narrow trail worn smooth by time, lay a garden kept in soft silence. It was not lush, not crowded with leaves or color. It was a place of sculpted quiet planted thoughtfully with native cactus, dry grasses, and stones laid in concentric paths. The garden followed no rigid geometry, only the rhythm of the land itself. Large saguaro stood like gentle sentinels, arms lifted toward the sky, while smaller barrel cacti clustered together in silent communion. Spines glowed like threads of light under the sun, and shadows curled gently along the edges of each plant. In the heart of the garden sat a low stone bench, half in sunlight, half in shade, waiting as if it had always known someone might come to sit for a while. The air was warm, but not stifling. A breeze moved through with occasional care, rustling the fine hairs on desert blooms, stirring the tall ocotillo stems, and sending soft tremors through the pebbled ground. Even the insects, which hummed low and steady, seemed to understand the unspoken rule here. Nothing rushed, nothing pushed, nothing pierced the peace. I sat on the bench and let my body sink into stillness. The stones beneath me were warm, but the shade cast by a nearby mesquite tree brought a perfect balance of cool. It was a shade not dense, not abrupt, but dappled like water, gently filtering through silk. Through the branches, the sky shone a pale and cloudless blue, stretched smooth from edge to edge like a wide, woven cloth. In this hush, there was no beginning, no end, just the breath of the moment, soft and unhurried. Beside the bench, the ground was covered in fine gravel, with small clusters of flowering cactus rising from carefully tended soil. One bloomed in slow, open surrender, a delicate blossom of pale yellow opening to meet the day. Each petal held light the way stone holds heat quietly, without urgency. A bee floated past and landed on the bloom, its tiny weight barely enough to shift a shadow. It lingered, then drifted on, unbothered, as though time did not move the same way here. The scent in the air was faint, dry, earthy like clay, warmed by the sun and leaves long since fallen. There was the faintest trace of sweetness, maybe from the nearby agave or from the brittlebrush bush, now heavy with yellow blooms. It was a scent not easy to name, because it belonged wholly to this place, a scent born of dust and light and time. As I sat, the sounds began to blend together into a kind of quiet music. The insects' steady hum, the occasional rustle of small creatures through the brush, the distant creak of wood expanding in the heat, each sound was low, soft, belonging entirely to the stillness. Somewhere farther off, a wind chime caught the breeze and gave a few notes, like a whisper from another home, another shaded porch, another moment mirroring this one. The garden curved around the bench, the stone path looping back toward the town, but never fully closing. I traced it with my eyes, letting the simplicity of its form lull my thoughts. A single red rock had been placed at a corner, not for decoration, but perhaps to mark a turning point. Or maybe it was just what had always been there, like the bench, like the sky, like the sense that this was not a place meant to be changed, only noticed. I leaned back just slightly, letting my eyes close for a moment. Behind my eyelids, light continued to filter in orange, soft gold, a memory of sun on skin. I breathed slowly, deeply, and felt the rhythm of the garden settle in around me. It was not a silence of emptiness, but of fullness, a silence with shape and scent and warmth. Far above, a hawk circled once, its shadow sweeping over the ground like a hand smoothing a blanket. The air beneath its wings was still, and the space it passed through closed again behind it, leaving no trace. Even the flight of birds here felt unhurried, measured, peaceful. After some time, how long? I couldn't say. I opened my eyes again. The light had shifted just slightly. Shadows now fell at a softer angle. The cactus blooms had opened wider, and the breeze was beginning to pick up the faintest scent of evening to come. But the peace remained, held steady by the garden's quiet design. I reached down and let my fingers brush the warm stone beside me, feeling the grain of time in its surface. It was smooth in some places, weathered in others. Like everything here, it had been shaped by wind, sun, and gentle use. It held the memory of stillness in its core. I did not speak. There was no need for words in this place. Only awareness, only breath, only the steady unfolding of an hour that asked nothing of me but to notice, to rest, to be. The cactus garden did not require praise or purpose. It existed fully in itself, and in that it invited the same from those who entered. As I stood to leave, I moved slowly, careful not to disturb the rhythm that had grown in my bones. The path back to the village shimmered gently in the heat, lined with quiet stone and open sky. But the calm of the garden followed with me, like the shadow of a tree that takes time to fade, even long after you've stepped into the sun. The path curved gently from the garden, leading back toward the heart of the town. Heat still rose in soft waves from the adobe walls, and the sunlight rested on everything with a warm, quiet patience. The sound of footsteps against the sun-dried earth was muffled, cushioned by dust and time. And ahead, nestled at the corner of a narrow street and shaded beneath the thick limbs of an ancient cottonwood, stood a small pottery shop. It was not marked by a bold sign or bright colors, only a faded piece of wood above the doorway, worn smooth by years of wind and sun. The door was slightly ajar, as if expecting someone to pass through without knocking. I stepped inside slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the cool dimness. The air was thick with the scent of clay, earthy, damp, and rich with memory. A faint trace of wood smoke lingered, as though somewhere in the back a kiln still smoldered quietly from an earlier firing. Light filtered in through a high, narrow window, falling in a pale, steady beam across the shelves. Everything was still. Every corner of the space seemed arranged not by decoration, but by rhythm. The rhythm of hands, of motion, of long afternoons spent shaping and smoothing. Clay dust hung in the air like memory made visible. Rows of hand-thrown pots lined the walls, some large and smooth, their bellies round like desert stones. Others small and delicate, with tiny imperfections that made them all the more perfect. Patterns etched into their surfaces spiraled, twisted, and told stories older than words. Some were colored with the gentle reds and browns of the surrounding hills. Others bore soft glazes of turquoise, echoing the distant sky. I moved quietly along the rows, letting my fingertips hover just above the surface of each piece. They felt warm, even in the shade, as if the sun had seeped into their very forms and stayed there. One bowl, glazed in soft ochre with fine lines circling its lip, caught my attention. I paused, leaned closer. The lines weren't perfect, some wavered. Others faded, but they drew the eye gently inward, like ripples on a pond. It felt alive, somehow, though it hadn't moved in years. Farther along, a grouping of small pitchers stood together, each with a slender neck and flared rim. Their forms echoed one another, but none were identical. They bore the touch of the same hand, perhaps many years apart. Time had slipped between their curves like wind through canyon stone, carving notches of difference, of uniqueness. On a wooden table near the back, unfinished pieces rested under cloths, some still damp, others drying slowly. The cloths were woven in simple patterns, their fibers stiffened by clay dust. A single brush lay across one piece of fabric, its bristles worn soft, its handle wrapped in thread. It had been placed down, not dropped. Everything in the shop suggested a certain carapace that honored process more than product. In the far corner stood the kiln, its round mouth dark and cool now, but ringed with the faintest traces of soot and glaze. The bricks were streaked with years of color, like a history book for fire. Each shade spoke of a different glaze, a different firing, a different season perhaps. And though it sat cold in the corner, there was a sense that it remembered heat intimately, that it had once glowed from within. Above it, hanging from a wooden beam, were old tools, wires, paddles, brushes, and carving loops. Some had handles wrapped in leather, others smooth by years of use. They hung not as display, but as readiness, as if their next use might come at any moment. A low bench beneath them held a block of clay wrapped in damp burlap, waiting to be transformed. The scent rising from it was almost sweet in its rawness. A kind of beginning. There were no words written on the walls. No labels, no prices. Just the language of form and texture, of earth shaped by hand. Every object was a conversation between the potter and the land, between silence and creation. I stood among them, a quiet witness to that dialogue, feeling not like a visitor, but like someone who had returned to something deeply familiar, even if I had never been here before. A tall, narrow vase stood on a small pedestal near the window, lit by the slant of afternoon sun. It bore a single etched line that spiraled slowly from base to rim, like a breeze rising through canyon walls. The glaze on its surface was thin, almost translucent, allowing the texture of the clay to speak beneath it. I traced the line with my eyes, slowly, letting its pace become my own. For a while, I simply stood, letting the quiet settle over me like dust. The shop was not silent, not entirely. The wood of the shelves creaked slightly, responding to the warmth of the day. A fly buzzed somewhere near the window. Outside, a dove cooed softly from the cottonwood. But none of these sounds disrupted the stillness. They belonged to it. They shaped its edges. Before leaving, I let my hand rest gently on the rim of a bowl near the door. Its surface felt cool, yet beneath that coolness lingered a quiet warmth, an echo of the fire it had once known, the hands that had shaped it. Clay, I thought, carries memory in its form. It holds each press and curve, each patient pause. And perhaps, in touching it, we too remember something older, something steady. Stepping outside, I blinked against the soft brightness of afternoon. The air met my skin with a familiar warmth, wrapping around me like a gentle shawl. Behind me, the pottery shop stood silent and still, yet full of breath, as though it were part of the desert itself formed, not only from adobe and wood, but from silence and care. The breeze stirred again, bringing with it the subtle scent of mesquite and distant stone. I paused and glanced back. The door remained slightly open, exactly as I had found it. A small gesture that said, "This place isn't closed. It waits," as clay does not demanding, not urgent, simply present, ready always to hold shape again, ready to hold memory and quiet and time. The late afternoon sun stretched long across the desert town, casting golden light that lingered on every surface. Walls that had glowed honey-colored at midday now deepened into warm amber, and the earth itself seemed to exhale. This was the hour when shadows softened into quiet companions, moving slowly with the day's last light. Walking gently through the outer paths of town, I followed where the sunlight fell. Its angle now was low, brushing the tops of adobe walls and glancing across weathered wooden beams with a painter's grace. The light no longer blazed. It glowed. It whispered. The heat of midday had passed, and the air, though still warm, had taken on a cooler patience. Each step brought a deeper sense of stillness, as though the town were preparing for rest, inviting each moment to slow with it. Along the side of a quiet house, I paused where a small pinwheel spun lazily on a fence. Post. Its weathered blades turned in a rhythm so slow it almost didn't turn at all, catching the light and casting circular shadows on the stucco wall behind it. I watched as the shadow turned and turned again, barely moving, yet somehow marking time. It felt like a desert clock, telling time not in minutes or hours, but in quiet rotations, gentle and wide. Nearby, a low garden wall had been built from rounded river stones, each smooth and sun-warmed. As I traced my fingers across them, they seemed to hum with the memory of days beneath sky and sun. Shadows pooled softly around their bases, stretching across the sand in long, elegant lines. Even these shadows moved with care, slowly shifting as the earth turned. There was no rush. The day had no need for urgency. Farther down the path, I came upon a wide patio where sunlight filtered through the slats of a wooden awning. The beams above created a lattice of light and shade, laying a shifting pattern across the floor like woven cloth. The sunprints flickered as the wind nudged the branches of a nearby tree, letting leaves cast delicate silhouettes over the grid. It was like standing in the middle of a quiet dance between light and leaf. A small lizard, still and attentive, rested on the edge of one sun-washed tile. Its body barely moved, and its shadow mirrored it exactly, a perfect echo on the warm surface. The lizard blinked once, then again, its presence calm, belonging completely to the moment. Here, nothing sought to be more than what it was. The light honored each detail, not by illuminating it harshly, but by settling upon it gently, offering it presence without fanfare. I sat on a wooden bench that had grown silver with age. The boards were smoothed by sun and wind, their grain, softened by seasons. Around me, the light continued its slow drift, and I let it wash over me, over the space, over the silence. My thoughts moved like the pinwheel slow, wide circles that didn't seek a destination, just motion. Just quiet dot above, the sky was still pale blue, but its edges were tinged with the faintest blush of rose and lavender. The color crept in, from the corners, as if the sky itself were beginning to close its eyes. Birds passed overhead, their shadows flitting briefly over the patio stones. Their wings caught light, then returned it, folding into silhouettes as they disappeared toward. The hills dotted a far window. Glass reflected the setting sun in muted tones. The frame, old and hand-carved, held the reflection like a picture, but the image was never still. As the sun moved, so too did the light across the glass, changing from pale gold to deep amber, then to a color like smoldering coals. The whole town seemed bathed in this gentle firelight, not burning, but warming. Holding dot, the silhouettes were longer now, reaching farther into the quiet spaces of the garden, stretching over smooth stones, ripples of sand, and a few woven mats left to dry in the fading sun. The afternoon light, warm and low, moved softly across every surface. But it did not claim them. It merely noticed them. The desert is not a place that insists. It watches. It remembers. It gives. Even the wind had changed. It no longer carried the dry chatter of the earlier day, but something more hushed, more careful. It passed through the edges of a planter where some wild grasses had grown, gently lifting their sun-dried blades. Their shadows fluttered faintly across the path, like thin brushstrokes in motion, here for a moment and then gone. That movement wasn't meant to draw attention. It simply happened without purpose or display. It was part of the rhythm, and that was enough. Time, too, had softened. I no longer felt the need to mark it. The air was filled with quiet sound, not silence, but the kind of hush where everything has settled into its place. Cicadas called somewhere far off, their hum steady and slow. A breeze whispered through the wooden fence behind me. My breath joined the stillness, calm and even, part of the fabric of now. The sun had dipped lower, casting a golden hue that deepened into rose, then violet. Light no longer poured. It trickled. The patio had grown dim, shadows stretching across it like long sleeping limbs. The warmth that remained was no longer from above, but within the lingering echo of what had been. The pinwheel still turned gently in the last sigh of air. All else remained still. I rose slowly, my shadow rising with me. Together we walked along the edge of the garden, across smooth stone and soft dust. My shadow shifted with each step, a faithful echo, stretching and folding, always present. We were not separate from the place. We belonged to it, as it belonged to itself. When I paused again, I looked up. One star had appeared, faint but certain. The day had left its shape on the world softly, briefly, completely, a sunprint, quiet, fleeting, whole. Tonight, we slow down even further, stepping inside a quiet Adobe kitchen nestled behind a garden wall. In this space, time doesn't hurry. It gathers, lingering softly in corners, wrapping itself around earthen floors and shelves of clay. Here we'll steep a cup of desert tea, letting each scent, sound, and flicker of light settle around us like the warmth of a faded blanket. The kitchen is still. Its thick adobe walls curve gently at the edges, painted in pale creams and sun-washed. Terracotta. The surface shows its age in the most delicate ways. Subtle ripples in the plaster, faint smudges left by hands now long gone, the texture of care pressed into every wall. There's a narrow wooden counter beneath a small window, where the last light of day slants in quietly, falling in thin golden lines across glass jars and a wide ceramic bowl filled with dried desert herbs. A blackened cast-iron kettle rests on a trivet, cool and still, waiting for warmth. Around it, the kitchen holds its breath. Nothing stirs. Yet there's comfort in that stillness, a kind of hush that invites your shoulders to lower, your mind to soften. In this moment, all that matters is this gentle place, and the slow ritual of tea to come. The space holds a stillness that encourages stillness in return. It's not empty, but settled. A few simple utensils hang from iron hooks. Woven cloths are neatly folded on a shelf. A handmade ceramic mug sits by itself on the windowsill, catching the sun. Everything here feels chosen, not for show, but for presence. Even the dust, fine and golden in a corner, seems to belong. With a slow breath, I reach for a bundle of dried mint. The stems are twisted and pale, the leaves a faded green-gray, curled at the edges. When I crush a few gently between my fingers, the scent rises immediately clean, cool, and grounding. Desert mint grows low and strong, surviving through wind and heat and carrying the memory of rain. It is not sharp, but deep, the kind of scent that seems to settle into your chest. I place the leaves into a small clay pot with a wide mouth and a tiny crack along its base. It's been mended before, and it still holds. The water begins to warm on the stove's soft bubbling, not yet boiling. The steam is slow to rise, and as it does, it curls along the edges of the pot, wrapping itself around the mint. The scent deepens with the heat, filling the room like a whisper of something remembered. While the tea steeps, I sit on a low bench beside the window. Outside, the light continues its quiet path across the courtyard. A few birds shift in the branches of a nearby tree, their movements lazy, almost drowsy. The air holds a hint of warmth, but no urgency. Nothing here hurries. Not the light, not the leaves, not the tea. The moment stretches without strain. The kettle gives a soft sigh. Not a whistle, just a gentle push of breath that signals the water is ready. I pour slowly, letting the stream fall in a quiet arc over the herbs, releasing more of their essence. The scent rises again, a little sharper now, edged with the warmth of stone and fire. The clay vessel darkens slightly as it receives the heat, its crack nearly invisible again. I carry the pot and a mug to a small table in the corner. It's made of old wood, its surface marked by decades of use rings from past cups, scratches from buttons or belts, a soft dip where hands have rested. I pour myself a cup and watch the steam drift upward in lazy spirals. The tea is pale at first, but rich in its clarity. Its warmth finds my palms through the mug and spreads slowly. I sip. The flavor is simple, and because of that, it's complete. Earthy, with the cool thread of mint running beneath it. There is no need for sugar, no need for anything more. Just heat, leaf, and time. The taste settles into me as much as the scent did before. My breath slows, my shoulders ease downward. This is the kind of moment that fills you not with energy, but with quiet. I sit for a long while, drinking slowly. Outside, the light changes again, leaning more into gold. The sun is lower now, but still present, still generous. It catches the lip of the mug, the rim of the pot, the edge of a spoon. Each glimmer is a small ceremony, unnoticed unless you're still enough to see it. The tea cools gradually, but never too much. Its warmth lingers. I trace the edge of the mug with one finger. The clay is smooth, a little uneven, handmade, like most things here. It speaks of someone's care, not perfection, but presence. I think again of the mint, pulled from dry ground, wrapped in twine, left to rest, nothing about it rushed. And so it gives something that endures. As the last of the tea slips down, I feel the shift in the room. The air now carries more shadow than light. The breeze through the window is cooler, more certain, a soft creak from the wall. The kitchen, like everything else, moves gently into evening. I rinse the pot and the mug with cool water, watching the tea leaves spiral briefly before sinking. Then I place them back on the counter, as if returning something borrowed. The scent still lingers, long after the water has gone. It clings to the walls, to the cloth, to the quiet. One last look out the window shows the sky beginning to tint lavender. A bird settles into a branch. The earth seems to hold its breath, not in tension, but in calm. The tea has done what tea is meant to do. It has reminded me to slow down, to sit still, to notice the small and quiet things that shape a day. So I leave the kitchen as I found it, quiet, steady, grounded in earth and memory. Behind me, the air still holds the soft trace of mint, the echo of steam, the hush of warm clay. A moment not gone, a gently steeped into the walls. In a quiet corner of the sun-washed town, where two narrow streets met in a hush of golden dust, stood a building both humble and enduring. Its adobe walls leaned gently with time, painted by the years in muted shades of clay and cream. A wooden sign, faded almost to nothing, hung over the doorway. The lettering had worn away, but the meaning remained. This was the library. It stood in stillness, as though holding its breath between memories. The door, thick and splintered, gave a soft creak when nudged open, like the gentle exhale of a place that had waited long and patiently for someone to step inside. The hinges did not resist. They welcomed. The scent inside was like the hush of pages turning dry paper, old leather, desert air. Light filtered through a single high window, casting thin beams that drifted like ribbons over wooden floors. The room was cool, not cold. Shelves lined every wall, floor to ceiling, crowded with books in every shape and shade of time. There, spines were faded, their titles softened into quiet. Some books stood upright, others leaned tiredly against their neighbors. A few rested in small stacks on the floor, as if unsure where they belonged, but content to simply be. Dust had settled gently in the corners and across untouched covers, not as neglect, but as a kind of desert blessing, proof that the world outside moved, even if this place did not. A wooden chair with a woven seat sat tucked near the back wall, beside a small round table that held a ceramic bowl filled with smooth stones. Each stone was different, some pale as bone, others marked with lines like miniature maps. They, too, were stories, only in a different language. I moved slowly between the shelves. The floor creaked with each careful step, not in protest, but in conversation, as if the old wood remembered every footfall that had ever passed this way. There was no system here, no rigid order to the arrangement. Books of poetry stood beside field guides. Cookbooks whispered beside journals. The room seemed to have arranged itself by memory rather than catalog, I reached for a book with a cover of worn green cloth. Its edges were frayed, its binding loose. The title had once been pressed in gold, but now only the suggestion of letters remained. When I opened it, the pages breathed out a faint trace of wild sage and thyme. The words were handwritten in soft, sloping script entries of observation, quiet joys, and garden notes. It was not a famous work, but it had been loved. Each page revealed something small and human. A note about planting seeds before the first rain, a drawing of a yucca flower, a sentence about the shape of clouds on a long afternoon. None of it urgent. All of it important in its own gentle way. One page had a pressed flower tucked in the fold, a brittle bloom the color of sun-faded brick. It crumbled slightly as I turned the page, releasing a faint, dry scent like the breeze at midday. I paused, letting that moment root itself in my chest before reading on. I closed the book and returned it to its place, my fingers trailing along the shelf as I walked. There was something deeply grounding in the presence of so many words, so many thoughts stored in silence. This was not a place of performance. It was a place of keeping, of remembering. In one corner stood a wooden cabinet with tiny drawers, each labeled in faint pencil. I pulled one open and found a small stack of postcards, each carefully bundled with twine. The cards bore notes from travelers, residents, friends. Some dated back more than 70 years. Their handwriting danced across the cards with grace and patience, filled with weather reports, recipes, and the names of desert blooms. In early spring, one card described a dust storm and the way the clouds curled like sleeping snakes. Another had a child's drawing of the library itself, with crooked windows and the word books scrawled underneath in a shaky hand. These messages, once fleeting, had settled here permanently, as part of the library, as part of the town. The room itself seemed to lean into the past, but not out of sorrow. Rather, it felt as though it knew that nothing is ever truly gone, only resting in quiet places, like this one. Outside, the sun continued its slow journey across the sky. Inside, time moved differently. It folded gently here, like cloth tucked into a drawer. In the far corner was a bench made from reclaimed wood, its surface smooth from years of use. A faded quilt, likely hand-stitched, was draped over one end. The fabric had softened with time, the colors muted into earth tones. I sat there for a while, the book still warm in my hands, listening to the soft creaks and the occasional rustle of the wind. Outside the window. No one else came. The library did not need a crowd. It existed in quiet companionship with the town, holding its stories not for show, but for comfort. Even the silence here was layered with memory, with thought, with the kind of deep rest that only old places. No, I let my eyes roam the room again. Over the uneven shelves, the baskets of bookmarks woven from dried grasses. The painting on one wall of a mesa at sunset, its colors almost the same as the ones outside. Everything here had been chosen. Nothing was hurried. Eventually, I stood and returned the book to its shelf. Its presence there, even slightly tilted, made the room feel whole again. I stepped toward the door and paused. The light had shifted. The floorboards glowed softly underfoot. As I stepped outside, the door eased closed behind me with a sigh. The street remained quiet, the light now more amber than gold. I looked back once, just once, at the old Adobe library, its windows reflecting the afternoon sun. It looked unchanged, eternal in its softness. And though I carried no book with me, I left with stories, not ones I could repeat, but ones I could feel. Stories folded between dry pages and beams of quiet light. Stories that needed no telling. In that silence, there was everything. As the golden light of late afternoon began to soften, the first hues of evening quietly emerged across the desert town. The air, still warm from the day, held a new gentleness, less radiant, more reflective. The sky shifted gradually, touched by soft lavender and pale rose, like watercolor spilling gently across a canvas of fading blue. From the horizon, shadows lengthened along adobe walls and wove between alleyways with deliberate calm. A breeze stirred cooler now, as if drawing its breath from the base of distant mesas. It rustled through the yucca trees, whispering across their sharp leaves and carrying the clean, mineral scent of settling dust. Somewhere in the distance, a faint beat of wings passed overhead. A young owl glided silently, its flight both purposeful and unhurried. It moved like a promise, ushering in the coming of night. Along one narrow street, lined with low clay houses and scattered garden pots, the quiet deepened. The laughter of children, once echoing against the walls, had faded into memory. Doors were gently closed, windows latched with care. The town was not falling asleep, it was transforming, becoming part of the evening, the way rock becomes part of shadow. The color of the adobe houses responded to the waning light. What had been sun-washed ochre now seemed deeper, more earthen. Terracotta darkened into quiet russet. Pale cream turned silver at the edges. All around, the town grew quieter, but not silent. It was the kind of quiet that listened. Outside one home, a clay wind chime began to sway, moved by the shifting air. Its sound was soft and hollow, like distant water over stone. Each tone was brief, then gone, leaving only its echo to linger in the ear. The chime's rhythm matched the changing light, steady, inevitable, small. On a low wall near the town's central square, a cat settled into the warmth left by the day. Its eyes were half closed, body curved like a crescent moon. Occasionally, it flicked its tail, but mostly, it remained still part of the peace that settled in with the dusk dot in the plaza. The fountain long dry, but never abandoned cast long shadows across its basin. A bird dipped down briefly, fluttered along its rim, then vanished into a jacaranda's darkening branches. The scent of blossoms, sharper now in the cooling air, drifted through the square in gentle bursts. A woman walked slowly across the flagstone path, her sandals brushing against the sand. She carried a small basket in one hand, filled with herbs wrapped in cloth. As she passed the threshold of her home, she paused for a moment, breathing in the evening fully as if to carry it inside with her. The door closed softly behind her dot above. The sky deepened. The lavender thickened into amethyst, then violet. One by one, stars began to appear, not bursting, but blooming into visibility, each one flickering as if remembering how to shine. The moon was still absent, but the heavens seemed to prepare for it, the way a room softens before a guest arrives. Further out, where the houses gave way to open land, the desert floor glowed faintly under the weight of coming night. The creosote bushes darkened into outlines, their perfume rising slightly with a drop in temperature. A jackrabbit moved through the brush, cautious but not fearful. The desert, even in transition, held no threat-only presence. Atop a nearby hill someone had lit a lantern. Its glow was steady, casting amber light onto the stones around it. The wind moved past the flame, but did not extinguish it. The light swayed and blinked, a conversation between fire and air. From that hill, one could see the entire town settling into night, not turning away from the day, but carrying it inward. As twilight deepened, the patterns of the town became quieter still. A few final voices rose and fell, then vanished. The pottery shop closed its shutters. A gate creaked once, then clicked into place. The last of the sunlight slipped down the walls like honey, thick and slow, before disappearing altogether. Now, the desert held its breath. Everything paused, not in hesitation, but in reverence. The wind softened. The light thinned. Daylight had not vanished. It had only changed form, slipping into a gentler hue, into the hush between gold and violet. The brilliance retreated behind. The hills, but the land remained anchored, whole, alive in a different way in this stillness. The voice of a nightjar broke through low and echoing. A thread of sound stretched across the cooling air. A reply came, distant but clear, like an echo of memory sent back. Then silence again. Not absence, but pause. These were no longer the busy calls of day. These were gestures of recognition, brief exchanges meant only to confirm presence. Day had its stories and its sounds. Night required none. Somewhere nearby, behind a clay window framed in shadow, a candle flickered to life. Its small flame wavered, then steadied, casting a soft halo on the adobe walls. Then another light appeared, and another. Across the quiet town, one by one, tiny flames blinked into being. The darkness was not broken, only warmed. This was how. The desert met the night, not with resistance, but with quiet offerings of light. Not through struggle, but through persistence. Each glow was a memory made visible, a gesture of hope drawn from within. Above the square, the young owl returned. It circled slowly, wings silent against the dusky sky, then landed high atop the bell tower. It blinked once, turned its head, and stilled. Now it watched not to guard, but to witness, the keeper of quiet things, of changes that happen with no announcement. Beneath its gaze, the town let go of the day. There was no reluctance, no farewell, only a soft yielding, as if the earth, the buildings, even the trees remembered how to enter the rhythm of darkness. Night didn't fall. It arrived gently, completely. And what it brought was not void. It was presence. It was peace. Inside a modest adobe home nestled near the edge of the plaza, the light had changed. The day's final warmth still lingered in the thick clay walls, but the sun was gone now, and in its absence, something more intimate took its place. Candlelight. The room was small, square, and built low to the ground, as if closer to the earth on purpose. Its walls were made of sandstone, worn smooth in places where hands and time had passed over them. Red-toned and mottled, the stone glowed in soft waves beneath the flames, each candle casting its own rhythm of light and shadow. The effect was like watching breath flickering, expanding, retreating again. Alive but quiet, there were perhaps 6 candles in all. One in a clay holder near the window. 2 more in old glass jars set into the wall's narrow niches. One low on a carved table, its flame caught in a ripple of melted wax. And 2 others stood near the far end of the room, where a shelf of weathered pottery cast long silhouettes onto the floor. The light touched everything but demanded nothing. It simply arrived and lingered, softly outlining the world in amber. And gold. A woven rug lay stretched across the floor, frayed at the edges, its desert motifs arrows, stars, curling wings muted by time. A ceramic pitcher rested beside it, filled with cool water. Next to that, a small plate of prickly pear fruit and mesquite wafers had been left untouched, waiting not for hunger, but for pause. This was not a place of urgency. This was a room for returning, for recovering something you didn't realize had been missing until it quietly reappeared. The air inside was still, but not stagnant. There was a sweetness to it, part candle smoke, part sandstone dust, part the faint memory of sage burned earlier in the day. It was the kind of air that held stories, the kind that made you sit a little slower, breathe a little deeper, speak a little softer. If at all, the walls, too, had memory. Pale smudges near the corner showed where furniture had once been rearranged. A darkened spot above the hearth suggested many seasons of use, now dormant in summer heat. And above it all, A single wooden beam stretched across the ceiling, split. Slightly in the middle, as if it too had aged alongside the home. I moved quietly to the center of the room and sat near the low table. The chair creaked gently beneath me, a sound that belonged here, like the faint rustle of fabric or the murmur of someone humming in the next room. I poured a little water into a clay cup, watched as the candlelight refracted across its surface, then took a sip. It was cool, with a faint taste of stone and copper, grounded, honest. Real. There were no clocks here, no hum of appliances or sharp notes of modern life. Only the occasional whisper of wind outside the window and the steady rhythm of candlelight breathing on the walls. Somewhere in the distance, the faintest bell rang once, perhaps the hour, perhaps the wind. Time moved differently in this room, not in a line, but in a slow circle, like the spiral carvings on the nearby pot. A small stack of linen sat folded in the corner, beside a sewing basket and a pair of finely worn sandals. Everything here had a place, but not a perfect one. It wasn't order that defined the room, it was care. This space had been touched, inhabited, lived in gently and without haste. Every object carried evidence of being used well and often, and none of it was decorative. Without purpose, I let my gaze drift to the shelves. Each item on them seemed to hum faintly with presence. A hand-painted bowl, chipped at the lip. A candle stub barely taller than a finger. A tin box with curled edges and the scent of rosemary sealed inside. These weren't decorations. They were anchors, holders of memory, of daily rhythms and soft habits. The things you reach for without thinking, because they've always been there. Outside, the world had gone deeper into night, but in here, the walls held steady. The candle flames leaned slightly with the breeze from an open transom above the door, but never wavered. They danced in unison across the sandstone, mimicking the way memory dances across the mind, sometimes flickering, sometimes clear, always. Warmed out in the center of the far wall hung a small textile, just a scrap, really. Dyed in faded reds and ochres, it bore the pattern of interlocked hills and stars. It was slightly off-center. One corner curled up, as if nodding toward some secret above. I didn't fix it. That, too, felt part of the room's truth. Beauty here wasn't curated. It was allowed to emerge. A moth drifted in through the open. Transom, drawn to the warmth of the nearest flame. It fluttered in and out of the circle of light before resting on the rim of a bowl. Its wings moved like breath. It belonged here, just as much as the sandstone and the candlelight, the silence, and the stillness. I closed my eyes for a moment. The quiet was full, not empty, filled with all the things the walls had heard and kept, with the breath of generations moving softly through flame-lit space. It was as if the house itself exhaled in rhythm with its visitor. I had come only for a moment, but the room seemed to recognize me not as a stranger, but as someone who remembered how to be still. When I finally rose, the floor was cool beneath my feet. I moved toward the doorway, brushing my hand gently along the sandstone wall as I passed. The stone was warm there, touched by candle heat, perhaps, or simply by the memory of many hands. I paused before stepping back into the night. The last candle by the window flickered once more, its light casting one final ripple across the far wall. The door creaked softly as I opened it, not in protest, but as if acknowledging the moment. Not everything needed to be said aloud. Some stories lived best in flame and stone. Some places, no matter how small, hold the shape of peace long after we leave them. And some lights, once lit, never truly go out. The Mesa stretched wide beneath the starlit sky, its flat top catching the last of the desert heat, slowly releasing it back into the cool air like a sigh. Up here, time did not march. It drifted, it circled. It hummed through wind-sculpted stone. and the fine dust that clung to your boots like memory. From this height, the desert no longer felt distant. It breathed with you. No buildings, no fences, no signs of division. Just stone, sky, and the quiet murmur of wind moving across the rock. It didn't whistle or howl, not tonight. Instead, it spoke in gentle pulses, brushing the tops of creosote and yucca, gliding over ridgelines, slipping into hollows with care. Each gust carried the scent of dry sage, and somewhere faintly, a trace of juniper smoke drifting from a long-cooled campfire. I sat near the edge of the mesa, legs tucked beneath a woven blanket. The rock beneath me had cooled just enough to be comfortable, still holding the warmth of the day, but softened by the deepening night. The quiet was not silent. It was full. The kind of fullness that makes you feel very small and yet more real. Far below, the lights of the town blinked softly, tiny flames caught in jars, scattered along adobe walls and cobbled paths. They seemed a world away, distant but dear, like memories you could almost touch. Up here, I was both part of that world and apart from it, an observer, a listener. The wind shifted again. This time, it brought with it the faint rustle of wings, a bat maybe, or a nightbird. I couldn't see it, only heard the rhythm of movement against air, then a pause, then another soft beat. These sounds became a kind of music, and the mesa, a stage. I placed my hand flat on the stone. It was smooth, pitted in places, etched by time more than tool. Beneath my palm, I imagined the stories it had absorbed, feet of travelers long gone, storms that passed with thunderous grace, animals resting beneath sheltering ledges. Stone remembers too, in its way. The stars grew brighter with each passing minute. They pressed close, crowding the sky in quiet celebration. No moon tonight, but the constellations were bold enough to make up for it. Orion hung low over the southern edge of the plateau, and the Milky Way arched like smoke across the heavens. Up here, the wind had no need to shout. Its messages were clear in their softness. It moved not to disturb, but to remind that even the stillest places are alive with movement. That stillness is not absence, it is presence, held and honored. I leaned back, resting my shoulders against a low, rounded boulder. It felt like leaning into the body of the mesa itself. The wind passed across my face like a blessing, cool and reassuring. My breath matched it. In, out, in again. I could hear my own heart, steady and unhurried. Somewhere, in the distance, a coyote called. The sound floated upward, reaching the plateau like a thread pulling at dusk. A second call answered, lower and farther off. Then, nothing. This was not a wildness that threatened. It was a wildness that welcomed. Not untamed, but uncontained. A faint scraping sound pulled my eyes downward. A beetle, its back polished like obsidian, made its way slowly across the stone. I watched it, marveling at the intention in its small journey. Nothing here was in a rush. Everything moved when it was time. The wind rose again, curling around me, tugging lightly at the corners of my blanket. It slipped into the folds of fabric, cooled the back of my neck, touched the tops of my ears like a whisper. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that whisper move through me. Above me, the stars remained silent, ancient, and endless. They blinked with a calm certainty, scattered across the darkened sky like echoes of time itself. Their presence didn't demand attention. It offered it. In their quiet shimmer, I found something steady, something that asked for nothing but presence in return. That the mesa beneath my feet had shifted, not in shape, but in meaning. It was no longer simply stone and shadow. It had become a place of communion, of stillness, of understanding. A threshold between the earth and the sky. An altar carved not by hands, but by wind and patience. It held more than just my weight. It held the moment. It held the memory dot, and somehow I held it back, not with hands or words, but with something deeper. With my breath slowed and softened. With my thoughts hushed to a whisper. With a kind of reverence I hadn't known I was capable of until the quiet asked it of me. Then the wind stilled. Just for a moment. In that breathless pause, everything seemed to settle. The dust that danced along the surface dropped into silence. The thoughts that had drifted like clouds within me stilled. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of presence, of attention, of meaning. Then the breeze returned, gentle and sure. It moved again across the stone, across my face, through my hair, as though exhaling for the both of us. A shared breath between land and traveler, between the ancient and the brief. Eventually, I rose. I folded the blanket that had kept me company and tucked it under one arm. My body moved without effort, as though guided by the stillness rather than the need to leave it. I retraced my steps across the mesa, each footfall light and sure. The path was faint, but I knew it now. My body remembered it. My spirit did too. My shadow, stretched long and quiet beside me, walked without a sound. Even it seemed softer now, less like a silhouette and more like a companion. It moved gently, as if honoring the hush that had settled into every crevice of the stone dot at the edge of the mesa, where the trail led down toward the distant town lights. I paused and looked. Back. The stone surface lay open, wide and patient, as though it had never noticed me at all, and yet had held me completely. The wind still moved over it, shaping its surface not with violence, but with time. I would return, but for now, I carried something of it with me. The hush, the breath, the knowing. The trail curved gently toward the quiet edge of town, where adobe homes sat farther apart, their soft walls holding the long light of evening. Here, the hush of the desert was allowed to thicken and settle, unbothered. It was in this space, between low-growing creosote and a stand of tamarisk trees, that I came upon the Basketmaker's porch. There was no sign, no name etched in wood or painted on adobe. It didn't need one. The place announced itself, not with words or invitation, but through a kind of earned stillness, a stillness that held the same weight as song. The porch itself was shaded by wooden vigas and softened by time. Its pale clay tiles were worn smooth from years of passing feet, some bare, some sandaled, some tiny, others slow and heavy with age. Baskets hung from the rafters like quiet sentinels, dozens of them, swaying in the breeze like lanterns made, not of flame but of earth and story. There were wide bowls with gently flared rims, deep containers with laced edges, coiled mats like sunbursts, and small tightly woven vessels that could rest easily in one hand. Each had a distinct shape, a unique rhythm. No two were alike, and none were random. Every basket bore intention. They had been woven from yucca fibers, willow branches, devil's claw, and native grasses, some bleached into pale bone by the sun, others dyed in shades pulled straight from the desert, ochre, iron red, dusty green, twilight blue, and soot gray. Patterns spiraled out from their centers, like memories unspooling zigzags, interlocked diamonds, meanders like riverbeds. These were not simply objects. They were memory, skill, lineage artifacts of care made visible. I stepped onto the porch, the old wood welcoming my weight without a creak. To one side, a chair sat empty, built from bundled mesquite branches and bound with strips of hide. Its surface had smoothed from decades of use. A low table beside it held a half-finished basket. Its tight, deliberate center had begun to spread outward, an open spiral of promise. Even unfinished, it spoke. It pulsed with quiet purpose. There was no one there, and yet the space was not uninhabited. The presence of the Basketmaker lingered. In every curve and coil, it existed in the tension of each strand, in the subtle variations in stitch and twist. It lived in the choice of dye, the angle of a loop, the way the fibers met and held. I moved slowly through the hanging pieces, letting my fingers hover just above the surface of one deep bowl, dyed in smoke gray and muted red. The spiral edits. Base seemed to draw the eye inward, not a trap, but an invitation. A place to rest. A place to begin again. Near the back of the porch, beneath a faded muslin canopy, stood a shelf of small clay jars and bowls. These held the alchemy of the basketmaker's palette: powdered sandstone and iron oxide, dried petals, crushed berries, strips of bark, flecks of lichen. Each had been gathered with care, prepared in patience, and stored like treasure. There was golden dye from rabbit brush, rust red from iron-rich clay, magenta from prickly pear fruit, and soft violet from desert. 40 single quotes clocks dot. Beside the jars sat a shallow gourd bowl filled with soaking willow strips. They floated in water, their edges curling gently, waiting to be shaped. Even in this in-between state, they carried intention. They were becoming. The scent in the air was warm and grounded fibers, clay, faint notes of sage, and the sweetness of dried mesquite pods. Nothing here was accidental. Every element, every smell, every motion felt part of a larger rhythm. I imagined the basketmaker rising early, slipping into the desert before sunrise, guided by instinct and habit. Perhaps they walked barefoot across cool earth, scanning the land for the right fibers. Perhaps they worked alone, or maybe with a child in quiet instruction. Maybe no words were exchanged, just the sound of footsteps, the rustle of gathering, and the shared cadence of a work remembered. I sat in the chair, careful not to disturb the unfinished work. The seat held the warmth of the day, and the arms, curved just so welcoming. From here, the entire porch became something else, something sacred. Not in a ceremonial way, but in the way that deeply lived spaces become sacred through repetition, care, and presence. The wind stirred again, and the baskets above me shifted with a soft rustling. Their sounds were dry, but musical, like the whisper of grasses or pages turning in an old book. I closed my eyes for a moment and simply listened. I thought about how weaving is not just skill, but legacy. It is a way of tying past to present, a method of keeping time, not clock time, but soul time. The act of weaving mirrored breathing, steady, patient, rhythmic, a quiet chant that needed no words. Through the screen door that led into the house, I glimpsed more baskets stacked one atop the other, inside nestled like kin. A clay mug sat nearby, filled with dried herbs and a single feather. Above it, an old photograph, faded by years of desert light, showed a woman with calm eyes and hands that looked like they knew how to shape a story without speaking. As twilight deepened, the porch changed color. Shadows lengthened, and the light took on that particular glow bronze, honeyed, hushed. The hanging baskets caught it and held it. Their coils glowed softly, like embers. Even the smallest vessel gathered light and gave it back. A moth fluttered into view, slow and zigzagging. It hovered near the jar of dye, then drifted upward, vanishing into the oncoming dusk. The air had stilled, but the stillness here was not emptiness. It was fullness. It was arrival. I rose slowly, brushing dust from my legs. I turned once more before leaving. The baskets still swayed gently in the wind, casting quiet shadows. They didn't need to speak. They had already spoken. I imagined the basketmaker returning soon, hands stained with color, arms full of desert grass and willow, footsteps sure. But even if they didn't return that night, I had felt their presence in the materials. Motion, the silence. It had reached me. I stepped off the porch and back onto the trail. The baskets whispered as the wind moved through them songs, not meant to be captured, only heard. By the time I reached the center of town again, the last light of day had faded entirely, leaving only the glow of moonrise and the slow hush that settles once the desert decides it has done enough. The plaza lay empty, save for a stray cat slinking. Along the edge of a garden wall, and the soft creak of a weathered wooden sign swinging gently above the door of the old trading post. Most windows were shuttered, most voices quieted, but the town was not asleep. It was simply listening. I walked without hurry, letting my footsteps find their own rhythm along the packed dirt path. The adobe walls around me once radiant in. Sunlight had taken on the soft silver of moonlight, their edges blurred, their corners softened. Roofs sat low and square against the sky, each one outlined in pale blue glow. The night had given everything a kind of reverence, as if even the smallest chimney or cracked window pane mattered in a story larger than any one moment. Above, the moon hung full and steady, not bright, not blinding, just constant. A soft disk, carved from memory, from rhythm. It did not demand attention. It simply gave light. Its beams slid across the rooftops, pooled in the corners of quiet courtyards, slipped along the curve of clay walls, and disappeared into the roots of tall, sleeping cottonwoods. I found a bench near the old well, just beneath a jacaranda tree, whose branches formed a dark web against the stars. I sat, listening. Somewhere, a wind chime spoke a low, almost imperceptible sound, like a voice trying not to interrupt. From where I sat, I could see the rooftops of half the town. They rose and fell gently like rolling dunes, some with ladders leaned against their sides, others with long-forgotten tools left behind, rusted, dusted, but still there. I imagined lives lived beneath those roofs, laughter echoing in kitchen corners, arguments carried into the heat of a summer afternoon, the scent of bread baking, the hush of illness, the weight of waiting. The moon touched everything, but it favored the roofs. That's where its presence lingered most. Where birds had nested earlier that morning, now only shadows perched. I thought of the owl from the bell tower, perhaps still watching, perhaps having followed me unseen. The rooftops were silent, but not empty. The desert was never truly empty. A dog barked twice in the distance, then nothing. From another home, a faint strain of music slipped through a cracked window soft, stringed maybe from a radio left on to fill the space. It wasn't loud enough to name, only enough to color the air. I tilted my head back. The stars had arrived in full now, crowding the dark like grains of sand. The constellations were almost unrecognizable. They had shifted since my childhood. Or maybe it was me who had changed, who now looked upward with different questions, quieter ones. I no longer needed the stars to guide me. I simply wanted to witness them. A breeze lifted, and I caught the scent of sage and juniper, faint but clean, honest. The wind here didn't rush. It didn't announce itself. It slipped between walls and branches like a hand threading through. Hair. Its touch was old, knowing. Looking out over the rooftops, I realized that moonlight was not passive. It was active in its stillness. It didn't create new forms. It revealed what was already there, hidden cracks, curves in the plaster, the soft dips in a roofline shaped by time and heat and rain. It made no judgment. It only offered attention. That's what the desert was doing tonight, offering attention. To everything, to everyone. And if you let it, it would offer it to you, too, not for what you had done or said, but for simply being here, for returning. For sitting still long enough to be seen dot in one rooftop corner, I saw a shape move. Just a small one, like the flick of a tail. Maybe the cat again, maybe something else. Life here didn't disappear at night. It simply changed form. It slowed. It quieted. But it watched the longer I sat, the more I noticed the moonlight's subtle gifts, how it traced the curve of a drying chili ristra hung from a doorpost, how it caught in the curved lip of a water jar, how it made even the cracked stucco of an old wall look graceful. It did not glamorize. It dignified. Somewhere behind me, a door opened and closed. A brief square of warm yellow spilled across the street, then vanished. Someone else awake, moving through their own story. Maybe heading to a sick child, maybe stepping out for air, maybe just pacing. The world did not pause at night. It changed languages. I thought again of the Basketmaker, of the rhythm of weaving, of how it mirrored the rhythm of this moonlit. Silence, loop after loop, one moment tied to the next, each gesture anchoring time. The rooftops felt like baskets themselves, now each home a vessel, holding stories, holding light. I stayed on the bench long after the wood had cooled beneath me, feeling the shift of the night deepen with each passing breath. My shoulders loosened, unclenching from whatever weight they'd been carrying, and I let the quiet fully hold me. The breeze moved around me with such gentleness that, after a while, I couldn't quite tell where it ended and where my own breath began. There was no rush here, no ticking of minutes, no need for purpose. Time passed, but not like it does in cities. It passed like a tide, slow and steady, marked only by the changing angle of moonlight across the rooftops. Eventually, I stood, slowly, as if waking from a long and necessary dream. My legs whispered their protest in the form of a dull ache, nothing harsh, just the body reminding me of the path still ahead. I turned once more, looking over the rooftops silvered by moonlight, each one etched with memory, shadow, and grace. The town didn't sleep. It rested with its eyes open. I walked the narrow path toward the guest house. In the window, a single, warm light glowed silent, unwavering. Around me, the hush held above it all. The moon remained, not watching, accompanying. The room was dim not with shadow, but with hush. It felt as though even the walls knew to whisper. A soft wool blanket lay across the small bed, woven in desert tones: russet, sand, faded sage, and the pale, wind-dusted pink of weathered stone. The fabric was coarse in texture but warm, like something made not just by hand, but by memory. The open window breathed gently, letting in the faintest breeze, tinged with the dry scent of juniper, sun-warmed rock, and the lingering trace of creosote. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called once, then fell silent, its voice swallowed by the land. The sound wasn't eerie. It felt right, an echo stitched into the quilt of night. I lay back on the bed, the cotton pillow cool against my neck, eyes half-lidded as I watched the final stretch of moonlight crawl across the ceiling. My breath slowed, aligning itself with the rhythm of the dark. Nothing in the room moved, and yet it was alive with presence, calm, aware, watchful. The world outside remained vast and hushed, but in here, space folded inward, softened, became intimate. Thoughts no longer arrived in sentences. They meandered like dry arroyos through my mind, curving, branching, retracing themselves. There was no urgency, no logic to impose. My awareness had begun to loosen, to drift. I wasn't thinking anymore in words. The mind had shifted to a more ancient language, one made of texture, scent, hue. I saw ochre, thick and mineral, the deep red of canyon walls when the sun slants low, the glint of mica beneath the skin of sand. Faint outlines of yucca leaves etched themselves behind my eyes. I could feel the blue-gray air just before dawn. These weren't memories. They were imprints, impressions as old as bone. I hadn't learned these things. I had always known them. The desert does that. It doesn't knock or ask permission. It enters quietly, through your breath, your skin. Your seeing and stays. Even behind closed eyes, the desert remains. A faint creak from the adobe wall reminded me the house, too, was part of this. Built from earth, it moved with the air, shifted with the seasons, settled with time. Even the silence it held seemed shaped by hands. The cool air curled around the edges of the room like silk ribbon. I imagined it brushing the corners of my thoughts, stroking them into stillness. There was no need to sleep yet, only to dissolve a little further, to blur the line between what is felt and what is imagined. Above the bed, a textile hung from a wooden dowel. It was simple, rough woven, dyed in the palette of the desert itself. Copper, lavender, rust, dust. The fibers held no clear pattern, no symmetry, only movement, as though someone had tried to capture the feel of a breeze or the moment before. Sunlight touches a ridge. It didn't demand understanding. It offered stillness. I stared until the shapes no longer held definition. Then I let my eyes close. Sleep didn't take me quickly, but that didn't matter. I had slipped into the in-between where time doesn't count, and thought unravels gently into sensation. The body quieted. Awareness expanded. In that half-state, moments from earlier surfaced, not in sequence, but in fragments. The soft give of clay beneath my feet, the sound of a moth's wings, a coil of basketry spiraling inward, a shelf of dyes, each a thread, each still warm. They did not tell a story so much as wrap around me. The day had not ended. It had only changed form. Began to dream, not in scenes, but in colors. Terracotta and turquoise, burnished gold, mica gray, the softest plum of twilight shadow, the deep, vibrant green of ocotillo leaves after rain, the color of breath, of memory, of silence holding shape. There were no people in these dreams. Number, dialogue, only the terrain of feeling, texture, depth. The dreaming mind didn't narrate. It received. And in that receptive state, I understood things I couldn't have spoken aloud. The desert was still speaking, just in another register. No longer through wind or birdsong, but through the language of tone and weight. It touched not the ears, but the inner walls of the chest, the space behind the ribs. Somewhere beyond the house, the wind lifted a strand of dry grass. I felt it not with skin, but from within. A subtle shift in pressure, like the page of a book turning in a distant room. Real or dreamed, it didn't matter. I rolled onto my side. The wool blanket gathered loosely around my hip. The air had cooled but didn't chill. It merely reminded me that the world continued turning outside these walls, that above the roof, the stars wheeled, and below the floor, roots pressed into earth. A quiet truth rose in me, not as a revelation, but as recognition. The desert is not empty. It is precise. It is deliberate. Every stillness holds shape. Every silence carries detail. It teaches you to stop filling space and instead notice what already lives there. Ceramic mug on the table shifted gently in the breeze, nudged by nothing more than air and gravity. Its contents were long gone, but I imagined the shape of warmth. It once held like sun cupped in clay, memory in heat. An HOLOWNESS. By then, I was drifting. The conscious self dissolved. I was no longer beside the desert, but within it, I became the Mesa broad, unmoving. I became the coil patient circular. I became the moth spiraling without fear. I became color held in fiber and stone, humming with light. And just before the full descent into sleep, I felt something settle into the room. Not a figure, not a presence I could name, just stillness with weight, like a hand on the heart. It had been with me all day through canyon and porch, through wind and woven thread. Now it joined me here. It asked nothing. It simply stayed. The desert had not receded. It had entered, and together we slept, not in darkness, but in color. A narrow wooden staircase led upward, creaking softly underfoot as I climbed to the second floor of the rambling Adobe house. Each step held a gentle memory of feet that had ascended before me, of baskets carried, of threads drawn tight. At the top, the door stood slightly ajar, inviting yet unassuming. I pushed it open and entered the weaving room. The space was modest in size, its low ceiling supported by rough-hewn beams darkened by time. A single window dominated one wall, its glass mottled and thick with age. Moonlight filtered through in pale ribbons, illuminating a large wooden loom standing quietly at the center of the room. Its frame was carved simply, but with care grain visible, edges smoothed by decades of use. Beside the loom, a bundle of dyed wool lay coiled in a woven basket, hues of desert dusk soft ochre, sun-faded red, twilight lavender, dry sage green. The yarn was thick and fibrous, each strand holding tension and promise. Nearby, skeins of wool dipped in natural dyes hung to dry along a line strung between posts rust from iron oxide, deep green from mesquite leaves, mustard from rabbit-brush blooms. The colors were muted but rich, as though they carried the memory of the land itself. I stood at the loom's side, fingers brushing lightly against its threads. The warp vertical threads were set in place, taut and ready. In the weaver's chair, a shuttle and spindle lay at rest. It felt as though the room breathed around them, waiting. A wooden chest against one wall held tools, carved combs for beating weft, bundles of bobbins, simple clay bowls of dye residue. The air held a scent of fresh wool, and something earthier perhaps. From the desert floor below, carried upward through open eaves. It was quiet, humble, unhurried. I took a seat on a low stool and leaned forward toward the loom. My fingers brushed the first row of weft, tracing the edges where color met thread. Even devoid of hands, the loom seemed ready. The fibers held memory in their tension. Patterns hinted at what might come bands of zigzag, fields of color that might become a yoke or wall hanging, tools not decoration, but language shaped in loop and pull. Above me, the beams held bits of clipped fringe, lengths of wool, scraps of fiber left behind. A small work table held open bundles of thread, and old shears, and scraps of paper with faint pencil-marked sketches of pattern. Somewhere, a moth had woven itself into the corner of a bundle. The room felt living not. Static, full of stories, not silence. A cool breeze slipped through the window, shifting the threads ever so slightly. In that movement, the loom seemed to breathe. The colors shifted, offering stray glints of color kissed by the moon. The wood, the threads, the tools they waited for hands to resume. I closed my eyes for a moment, moved by how sacred a simple room could feel. No altar, only craft. But the effect was the same. To sit in quiet devotion, offering attention to each strand, each hue, each motion. Weaving was not just an act, it was a rhythm. A conversation between hand and earth. I opened my eyes again and placed my fingers on the shuttle. Even this small gesture felt reverent. The thread against wood, smooth, cool. The weight of intention rested easily in my palm. Each movement would become part of pattern, part of shape, part of story. I rose then and stepped back, letting the moonlight cross the entire loom. The threads glowed softly with reflection. The coils of dyed wool at its base looked like captured light. Shadow followed color, and color was softened into quiet dot. In one corner lay a small book. Its leather cover faded, pages yellowed. Its spine read, almost unreadably, patterns of the ancestors. I opened it gently, leafing through hand sketchings of diamond motifs, sun spirals, interlocking waves. Notes in looping script spoke not of beauty, but of use, adaptation, memory. They. Oldest entry was dated nearly 60 years ago. Others followed, each page a gift passed forward. I closed the book and returned it to its place. The wood beneath my fingers seemed alive. I felt the weight of craft, of small daily offerings. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. A soft rustle came as I left the chair and turned toward the door. The room did not shift. It did not mind. It simply awaited. I looked once more at the loom, steady, expectant. Then I descended the stairs again, each step returning to earth. The house held its hush quietly around me as I passed back into the courtyard. There the night had cooled further, but the scent of wool and dye lingered still, as if carried down through floors and walls. I breathed deeply and felt the contour of memory in my chest. The weaving room was more than just a space filled with wood and fiber. It was a heart, quiet but steady, a pulse that beat softly through the bones of the house. The loom stood not merely as a tool, but as a presence, a center, a gathering of rhythm and care. In that room, pattern became presence, and presence, with time and intention, became something that felt remarkably like home. As I stepped beyond the threshold and moved past the porch, I felt the loom's quiet gravity follow me. The memory of fiber under my fingertips, of threads strung in tension and harmony, lingered warmly in my chest. It was as if the loom had woven something into me, an invisible thread I now carried forward. The air around me felt gently charged, as though it held the same delicate tension as the warp and weft of a well-made textile. Craft, I realized, isn't about arriving at an end. It's circular in echo, a rhythm breath shaped by motion and care. The desert, too, spoke in this language, not in grand gestures, but in loops, in layers, intangible patterns worn into earth and memory. I walked on through the courtyard, beneath the quiet stars, and when I looked back, the upper window still glowed. The loom was waiting, and in some way, so was I. The morning light was slow to arrive. It didn't burst through the sky, but sifted gently through it, like fine grains of sand poured through cupped hands. The adobe walls of the guest house blushed in warm hues, muted peach, sun-soft clay, pale gold. Shadows stretched long and gentle across the floorboards, not erased, but softened, as if time itself had been asked to step quietly. I rose without rush. My body remembered the rhythm of the desert, now how to move slowly without hesitation, how to feel each step rather than count it. A kettle warmed over a low flame, and the scent of sage tea curled into the air. I sat by the window and watched the world unfold. The plaza remained hushed, still wearing the memory of the stars. A few early birds stirred 2 elders near the well, speaking in low voices. A child chasing a feather that danced ahead of him on the breeze. But mostly, the town seemed to be stretching in its sleep, not yet called to motion. It was that in-between. Time again. Not quite dream, not yet day. I carried my tea through the quiet streets, where every corner held yesterday's dust and tomorrow's light. The town had aged gracefully, like a well-worn story passed between generations. Walls bore fingerprints of long-gone hands. Doors creaked with familiarity, not disrepair. Each stone in the path remembered its place. Beyond the plaza, I turned onto a narrower trail that twisted around the edge of town. The path curved downward through a shallow arroyo, flanked by mesquite and low desert shrubs. I could feel the heat starting to gather beneath the soil, though the air still held a chill from the night. Here, the town's voice faded, and the desert's song returned. It was along this path that I came to the hourglass tree. That wasn't its real name, of course, but that's how I thought of it. A lone, gnarled desert willow, shaped by years of wind and time. Its trunk split near the center, curving inwards and back out again, like the waist of an hourglass. Beneath its low canopy, the sand gathered, in soft spirals, swept by eddies of wind. Time didn't pass here in seconds or minutes. It gathered. It nested. I sat beneath the tree and let the silence settle in. The bark was worn smooth where hands had rested before mine. I could imagine others sitting just like this, watching the wind pattern the sand, listening to what wasn't said aloud. There were no carvings in the trunk, no markings to announce memory. And yet memory lived here, as sure as breath. From beneath the hourglass tree, I watched the land shift with light. The cliffs in the distance moved from rose to coral to pale. Gold, a dust devil stirred at the far edge of the plain, dancing briefly before vanishing. Even the air shimmered with movement too subtle to name. The desert, I was learning, doesn't care for time the way cities do. It marks nothing with clocks. It has no interest in hours or deadlines. It measures instead by sun on stone, by shadows, cast by how long a footprint remains before the wind brushes it away. And maybe that's why the tree felt so sacred. Not because it was old, but because it knew how to hold time gently. Not trap it, not resist it, but cradle it. Let it pass. Let it return. Let it settle like sand inside a vessel. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Behind my lids, the colors deepened. I saw again the woven baskets, the moth spiraling toward light, the mesa at twilight. I saw not with memory, but with presence. Everything I'd touched, everything that had touched me, began to loop together not linearly, but in circles like coils of a basket or the orbit of the moon. There were no boundaries in this place, only intersections, threads crossing threads, time folding into story, story folding into breath. A breeze passed through the tree, and with it came the faintest sound, almost a whisper. Not words, but intention. The kind of sound you hear with your skin more than your ears. I opened my eyes. A single feather drifted down, caught in a slow spiral. Pale gray, soft-edged, the kind that might have belonged to a dove or desert owl. It landed at my feet, its tip brushing the sand like a pen, tracing the first word of a sentence. I picked it up and turned it slowly in my fingers. Light, almost weightless, but real. A sign, perhaps. Or just a gift from the morning. The desert doesn't explain itself. It only offers. The sun had risen higher now, casting sharper edges on the world, but I didn't feel rushed. I sat with the feather a little longer, letting its presence mingle with mine. I didn't need to know where it came from. It was enough that it had arrived. Eventually, I rose, my legs stiff but steady. The sand beneath the tree held the imprint of where I had been, my own small hourglass of time. But already the wind was moving. Already the trace was softening. I walked back the way I came, feather in hand. The trail curved differently, now not because it had changed, but because I had. The land was still the land. The stones were still stones. But I saw them as if woven into the same thread that tied me to the loom, to the moth, to the stars above the Posidot at the edge of town. The rooftops appeared again, sunlit and familiar. A bell chimed once deep and clear, not to mark the hour, but to acknowledge it. I paused at the threshold between desert and home. I turned back once more toward the tree in the distance. It looked smaller now, almost like any other. But I knew better. Time had passed, and time had settled. Not in minutes, in meaning, and I carried it with me. Evening arrived not in silence, but in softness. It was the hush of footsteps over sand, the pause between day's breath and night's beginning. Light faded with gentleness, bleeding slowly from the adobe walls and cactus spines, shifting from molten gold to dusky rose to the deep cobalt of encroaching night. No shadows darted, no final birds called. It was as if even time chose to settle down, cross-legged, to listen. I crossed the courtyard slowly, a small woven mat tucked beneath. One arm, and a thick wool blanket russet and pine green draped over the other. Each step pressed faint impressions into the warm ground, footprints that would vanish before morning. From the porch, a dim lantern glowed amber behind the gauze of the screen door, casting just enough light to hold the edge of the dark at bay. The smoke of burned mesquite drifted lazily in the stillness, scented with memory dot above me. The moon had just cleared the horizon, a soft white disk with edges blurred by desert heat and sky dust. It rose without hurry, lighting the tops of the tamarisk trees and turning their fronds to silver lace. Crickets began their measured rhythm. Somewhere beyond the wall, a lone owl called once long and low, and then said no more. The cot waited. Beneath the oldest tamarisk, set where shadow and starlight could share its surface, I laid the mat down on the bare earth beside it. Its edges curled slightly from use, and its fibers held the texture of old reeds and patient hands. I smoothed the blanket over it, tucking a corner beneath the mat's edge to keep the wind from. Lifting it in the night dot, sitting first, then slowly reclining, I let myself lower into the blanket, feeling the day's last warmth rise from the earth into my bones. My muscles let go, one by one, shoulders, spine, jaw. My breath slowed without instruction. Overhead, the stars began to appear not all at once, but gently, like lanterns, lit one by one along a quiet road. At first, just the brightest Vega, Altair, Deneb, and then the smaller lights, the quieter ones, until the whole night was threaded with shimmering lines. They did not glitter sharply. Instead, they pulsed softly, their glow patient and unhurried. They belonged to no one, and yet they watched everyone. The wind moved slowly through the branches overhead, sending feathered shadows across my chest and arms. They danced as if drawn by brush and breath, sketching the sky's music across skin. I watched the patterns shift and return, again and again, never repeating, but always familiar. There was no story to follow, no thought to finish. My mind had given up its edges. It no longer needed logic or language. Instead, I drifted in sensation. The cool roughness of cotton at my neck, the warmth collected beneath the blanket, the scent of stone, just barely moistened by the air's breath. I reached to my side and found the feather I'd carried from the willow grove. It had been there since the walk beneath that canopy, pale, weightless, whisper-soft. I turned it, once between my fingers, and then placed it gently on the mat beside my shoulder. I did not need to hold it. Its presence was enough. Like the stars, like the hush, the moon had risen higher now, flattening shadows and illuminating the garden stones in soft blue-gray. Even the cacti seemed to glow, their spines catching slivers of light. Everything was quieter, but also more present. The kind of stillness that does not erase sound, but amplifies it until it becomes shape. From somewhere to the west, a single wind chime made a low sound, one hollow note bending gently, then falling silent. I imagined it swinging once, touched by the breeze, and then returning to its own stillness. The kind of music that needs no repetition. As I lay there, time began to shift, not abruptly, but subtly, as if the edges of the day had loosened and begun to curve inward. It no longer moved in a straight line, no forward, no backward. Instead, it spiraled softly, like the coiled edge of a woven basket or the concentric rings hidden in the core of an old tree. Each breath didn't follow the last out of obligation. It walked beside it, companionable and unhurried. There was no true beginning, no final end, only rhythm, only return. I could feel the warmth of the desert earth beneath me, not as mere heat, but as something deeper, something remembered. It rose, slowly through the blanket in quiet waves, as if echoing the long hours of sun held in the bones of the ground. My body, once distinct from its surroundings, slowly began to dissolve into that rhythm. My heartbeat slowed to meet it, to mirror the desert's pace. My muscles softened. My bones released their grip. I was no longer simply resting on the land I was being held by it. Even with my eyes closed, the stars remained. They no longer existed only as points of light. They had become presence calm and constant. Their shimmer lingered behind my eyelids. Their stillness breathed quietly within me. I floated among them, unmoving yet free. No thoughts tugged at me, no weight pressed. There was only this moment, full, quiet, enough dot in that slow drift. I became more than a body. I became Mesa-wide, patient, and filled with centuries of stillness. I became stone and thread, wind and root. I became the dust that rises from canyon floors at dusk and returns each evening to rest again. I became sleep, not an escape, but a homecoming. Sleep didn't fall over me. It unfolded gently, like a hush drawn across the soul. The desert didn't silence me. It welcomed me. And in that welcome, I rested. And when I finally slipped beneath the veil of dreams, the stars remained, the leaves stirred, the earth turned, and the desert, faithful and listening, slept beside me. The courtyard lay hushed beneath the weight of night, wrapped in a silence that felt both ancient and tender. Overhead, stars hung like whispered stories, distant, glowing, timeless. They didn't flash or flare, but shimmered gently, as if watching rather than shining. The moon, heavy and deliberate, floated just above the Adobe rooftops, its pale light draping the stones and benches in quiet silver dot. No footsteps echoed, no voices rose. Only the occasional stir of a night insect, or the soft sweep of wind brushing through tamarisk leaves broke the stillness. The desert wasn't fully asleep, but it was drifting there, preparing for rest, just as I was. I returned to the open courtyard, blanket in hand, my movements slow and simple. The woven mat remained beneath the same tree, its fibers still warm, with the day's lingering sun. I knelt, straightened its edges, and eased down. The wool blanket settled around me, smelling faintly of juniper, wind, and sun-baked dust. Around me, the night deepened. The air moved like breath, slow, sure, reverent. Even the breeze felt cautious, like it knew not to disturb what the desert was holding. Everything waited, gently, for sleep to come. The guest house behind me glowed from one window, golden and steady. No voices, no footsteps, just light. I imagined someone inside still awake, perhaps reading or tidying the last cup from tea. That glow felt like a final thread between me and the world of motion. I let it fall gently away. The stars above began to pulse deeper, fuller. Their patterns shifted as the earth turned beneath me. Orion leaned to one side. A bright cluster blinked between branches. I traced the lines with my eyes, then my breath, then my thoughts, until all aligned into rhythm. Every detail of the day moved through me like a slow current. I saw again the coiled baskets, still resting on the shelf. I imagined the loom, motionless but waiting, like a heartbeat between beats. The owl I'd glimpsed the night before seemed to flash again above my vision, wings wide and soundless. None of these were memories in the usual sense. They were companions, silent ones. They returned not to be rethought, but to settle beside me like dust on the wind. The ground beneath my mat remained firm, but not cold. It offered back to me the heat it had held all day, a kindness and silence. I felt the warmth rise through the fibers of the mat, through the wool, into my skin and bones. Slowly, everything inside me began to still. The wind shifted, curving through the branches of the tamarisk overhead. Their thin leaves danced lightly, and moonlight filtered through in flickering silver. I raised a hand to watch the pattern cross my skin. It looked like ripples on water, like breath, like time. I closed my eyes for a moment, and even with them shut, the stars remained. Not as pinpricks of light, no, but as presence steady, vast, and watching. Their glow lived behind my eyelids, like a memory of something older than thought. I floated, but I was grounded. I belonged to earth and air both. A firefly passed close, trailing a small curl of yellow-green light. It hovered near the mat, then spiraled upward again into the trees. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The night had no demands. With each breath, I took in the quiet. Not absence, but presence. A fullness without pressure. A song with no melody. Just the hum of being alive and aware in a world that had finally let go of urgency. I thought of the feather from days before, the one I'd carried from the willow tree. It still lay tucked in the folds of the blanket, small and weightless. I reached for it without opening my eyes, touched it with my fingers, and left it there. It needed nothing from me. It simply was. A bell rang far off, faint, distant, perhaps wind catching a chime, or the sound of a door closing for the last time today. It passed through me like a breeze. My eyelids were heavy now. My limbs had softened. Even the motion of breath felt less like effort and more like belonging. I felt the curve of the world beneath me, the arc of the sky above, and the pause that stretched between. When the desert finally deepened into complete stillness, I sensed something settled beside me. Not a shape, not a sound, but a presence. Quiet, watchful, and ancient. It asked for nothing. It didn't speak or stir. It simply was. Whether it was the desert itself, the spirit of the day now fading, or something older than both, I couldn't say, but I felt it. And it felt me. Wordless understanding passed between us. I lay beneath the star-pierced sky, eyes closed, but something deeper stayed awake. The shimmer of the cosmos passed not above, but through me, soft and slow, like a lullaby written in light. The darkness folded around me with care, as if I were something small and precious. My breath slowed, syncing with the earth's own rhythm, as if we shared one body. Sleep didn't come like a door closing. It came like dusk creeping gently behind my thoughts, warm and unhurried. It needed no invitation, only acceptance. And I gave it freely. I carried with me everything this place had offered. The strength of stone, the hush of the wind, the looped patience of weaving, the gold warmth of adobe walls at sunset. These weren't just memories. They were truths I now held in my bones. So rest now, as the desert does not in retreat, but in trust. The stars remain above, steady and watching. The wind breathes through the trees. The sky wraps you in its vast arms, and the earth remembers you. Let your breath follow the curve of dunes. Let your thoughts fade like morning mist. You are held. You are part of this quiet. Sleep well. Sleep fully. The desert is with you. Good night.